You've heard Andy talk about the next 5 to 7 years, about all the whole range of Internet of Things and personalization, the way our lives are starting to change on a day-to-day basis. Matthew's just terrified us with what might come in the next 40, 50, 60 years to help us out. We've also got Griffin going to come to join us from the rail delivery to bring another different perspective to our panel. Now, this last step, and we are running a little short of time, but we've got about 10, 15 minutes where we just want to talk about pushing the boundaries on personalization. And I think we've pushed some boundaries as we've talked about this whole piece. And we talked in my introduction just very briefly about this idea of what's the boundary between adding value to people's lives and becoming really creepy with it. And some of the stuff Matthew's just talked about sounds really creepy, but unfortunately a lot of this is already with us. Crispin, why don't you kick us off and tell us where the line is for you?
Let me answer that from a rail perspective, actually. I think the real challenge we've got as an industry is to introduce a modicum of personalisation. If you think about how you do internet shopping, I use Sainsbury's as a great analogy. You do your food shopping, you get to the end, it knows who I am, it knows my buying habits, and offers me that bottle of wine that I normally buy at a decent rate. I don't feel that as intrusive. I look upon that as a positive. Yet I spend an awful lot of money on my season ticket, an awful lot of money, and right now I don't have that relationship with the rail industry, the industry needs to get to that point where it has a meaningful and relevant is a really important word in this space, relationship with its customers. Some operators are good, but as an industry, we really have a challenge, and we have to strike that balance. And we're at the other end of the spectrum, completely at the other end of the spectrum. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. What we've got to do is understand that and work out how we have a lens on everything you were talking about and work out what it means for rail customers.
Great, thanks, Chris. Matthew, I'll come to you next. So you don't sound like you've got a line from what you've just been telling us, but in the context of how quickly do you think that line's moving, or do you see a line between the creepiness and the personalisation, the value add and just stepping too far?
Yeah, so realistically, let's face it, everyone wants to sell you something. Yeah, everyone, basically, if they're in this room, basically, if they could sell something to someone else, basically sitting next to them, would try. Technology isn't biased. It's humans, basically, that introduce the bias. So on the one hand, basically, if I'm an organization and I'm using all of your data to do good for you, you know what? You probably don't care. You probably think, well, actually, yeah, that's a good use. However, if I take all of your information and all of your data and use it to create fake profiles, go and destroy your credit rating and everything else, that's at the point where you go, actually, you know what? I shouldn't have shared everything I shared on the internet. So it's increasingly what we're finding basically is the information that you're sharing out there. There's the information that you know you're sharing. You know, what's your name, date of birth, you know, gender, all that kind of stuff. But increasingly, there is a huge amount of information basically that's coming through that you aren't explicitly sharing, and it's being collected on you. Because increasingly organizations are using all of this information to defer demographics. So they are implying the type of person you are, your health conditions. What happens if I take all of your data and decide that you are at risk of a heart attack because I know that you're always posting data of donuts basically on Facebook and you are always seen smoking round the back of the canteen? If I'm an insurer and I've got access to that information, and they do increasingly, I will put your premiums up. So while no one in this room has any way at the moment to take your information back, realistically, it's out there. There are new blockchain-based sovereign identity systems that allow you to control the dissemination and the use of your information, and those are becoming increasingly popular around the world. But you know, privacy advocates are always fighting basically for this. You know, you are going to be better known by the companies that are trying to sell to you than your wives and your children and your husbands will know. We're already there.
And Andy, I mean, just building on that, I mean, you spend your life advising companies in the more near term. What are you seeing in terms of the good versus evil I was talking about with Spider-Man at the beginning, and where people are getting it right and where people are maybe treading over the lines?
Well, I'm going to use a real example, actually, that Sarah showed up earlier. So she showed the highly personalised alien advert, which I think, if I answer that, as a consumer, I would have found momentarily really creepy, but then I would have kind of reflected on it and thought, actually, that's really quite cool. And actually, if that level of personalisation, it was shocking, and it was purposefully shocking. But I think it was done very cleverly with a view to me thinking, well, you know about me, and you're tailoring something to me. And I think with any of these, some of us are really open to change. Other people don't really like change very much. And I think the adoption of it is all about being able to see the true value of it. So for me, it's a bit shocking, but actually, I feel engaged with that advert. I feel compelled to go and see the film, which is what the outcome that people are after. So I think it's the creepy line is a difficult line to draw, because I think it can be a bit individual. And it can even be situational like that. To me, again, answering as a consumer, I think you've got to make the value really demonstrable to me. You've got to make it obvious that that's a cleverer advert than I've seen before, and therefore I like it. I like the fact it's tailored. I like the fact that I probably wouldn't, somebody else may not have even seen that advert. I feel like I'm getting a special service. You're making me feel special.
How many of you did see that advert that Sarah showed earlier with the personalisation at the end, where it said, in my case, Ian Run? How many, just show of hands, who saw the advert? Interesting, not that many of you. When I saw it, it's quite a creepy film anyway, and quite a creepy trailer, and it terrified the living daylights out of me when it said it. And I had to watch it again and understand what was actually going on. Guys, we've only got a few minutes left because we overran with some of the speech. Can I take some questions from the audience on this idea of pushing the boundaries on personalisation? And what things that you're struggling with in terms of where that boundary is and trying to find it in your own organisations? There's a microphone coming, if you just wait for a sec.
So a slightly different question for Matthew, but what will I think about that question in 10 years' time?
So one of the industries basically that I foresee coming through is privacy as a service. There's a variety of reasons. So on the near term, you're sharing that all of the information that you are sharing online is being used. You know that all the information that you aren't purposefully sharing online is also being used. However, today, basically, you think that as you walk around a city, as you walk into a building, you think you're offline, you think that information isn't being shared, stored on a database, how many people came into this conference room, all that kind of stuff. It all is. So we've got technologies coming through, basically, where I can use brain scanning technology, which is just a little sensor on the wall, and we're doing this in airports now, and I can scan your brain waves and figure out if you're an alcoholic. Now, in an airport setting, we are scanning your brain waves using an AI algorithm to figure out whether or not you're up to no good. But typically, some of these more sort of security-based technologies inevitably find themselves basically into the shop floors. Yeah, we can do. There's very little basically we can't analyze. I can identify your fingerprints from 100 feet away, your iris scan from 100 feet away, facial. That's ancient history, that kind of stuff. When we talk about behavioral analysis, things like facial recognition, we can look at your face, basically figure out 400 different data points. I can precisely predict your mood to just perfectly, let alone all the other things that are coming down the line. So today is the most private that you will ever be in the future. My kids are Generation Z, they're 2 and 5. They won't know what privacy is. They were tracked before birth. What's their name, what's their birthday, all this sort of stuff. They've been monitored before birth. So privacy as a service basically is something that will come up, because at the moment, irrespective of what governments are trying to do, no one has actually managed to create a system, really, certainly a large-scale system, where you control your own information, which means none of you have control of your information. If I say, go and erase your digital shadows, none of you could. You're already in the system. Is that good or bad?
Okay, now I'm more terrified of Matthew than I am of the Alien Covenant. Crispin, in some respects, the rail industry kind of fallen behind on this. It's a very transactional relationship with the rail industry. What is the rail industry doing to catch up, if you like, with some of this?
it's a really good observation, actually. There are some train operators that genuinely get it, but as an industry, collectively, I think you're right. We don't. So we know we've got some way to go. We know we've got to invest to improve the service. One of the challenges we've got, amongst others, is an element of trust between the customers, communities, the nation, and the industry. And I think right now that trust is at a number of levels. So I would I think the rail industry would experience a problem where we're asking customers to potentially share data that they might happily share in other spheres, but wouldn't necessarily with the rail industry because of a trust perspective. I don't know if that's true, but that is a perception, and I am sure the rail industry isn't unique in that space. I mean, some of the examples you've given, it's quite mind-boggling, the amount of information, if I think about it, that I know I put out and I'm willing to share. Yet, if I'm engaging with let's say a different organisation that I would normally engage with, I might think twice, and it's really unusual because that information's out there already. From a rail perspective, I think we've got the luxury of being able to look around and see what good looks like, what's shaping customers' expectations of other areas, but we can't continue to do that. We've got to have our plan. We've got to work out what that is. And actually, I've got a colleague sat out there in Transport Focus. In between us, we're trying to work out what that looks like.
What comes next?
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk to Matthew. Guys, we've probably got time for one more question from the audience. Has anybody got a burning question that they want to ask before we wrap it up? Okay, well, I've got one question for you, Matthew. You talked about 170 emerging technologies. And in the context of personalization, which is what this is all about, what's the one technology you'd advise this audience to really keep an eye on over the next 10 years?
So the one that is either going to be the most beneficial to you or the most damaging to you at an individual or an organizational perspective, basically, is artificial intelligence. Then would come blockchain, because blockchain basically is a very good way to amalgamate data, shall we say, in a secure way. But fundamentally, all of the information that's being captured is increasingly just being fed through an algorithm. So if you get the algorithm right, someone can get a mortgage. If you get the algorithm wrong and it reads and interprets the information on somebody incorrectly, they don't get a mortgage. So the quality of algorithms, for example, basically is probably is going to be one of the driving forces for the next 100+ years.
Okay, great stuff. Kristen Helm, Matthew Griffin, Andy Whitehurst, thank you very much. And thank you very much for being a good audience.